¿Quién es, obviamente? ¿Ya tuvieron chance de platicar con ella o no? Bueno, pues viene a compartirnos su trabajo, un poquito de lo que ha hecho en Laika y también en la última película de Guillermo del Toro. Vamos a recibir con un fuerte aplauso a Annika Schindler.
Hola, Pixelatl. ¿Cómo estás? I am so excited to be here today, and I am so honored to have the opportunity to talk about miniature costumes and my work. And yeah, first of all, I want to thank Christian for inviting me here. And yeah, my name is Annika Schindler. I am a miniature costume fabricator for stop-motion animation. And I have been working in the industry for more than 10 years. And most of you are probably familiar with my work through the Boxtrolls, Kubo, Missing Link, and only recently Pinocchio. So yeah, and I'm also teaching a class on miniature costumes because I think it's time to open up a little bit and show everybody how we do things to kind of get our craft more known. And so I developed a teaching program. I developed a class on how to make miniature costumes. So this is actually why I'm here. So I started teaching it, and I had a couple of Mexican students, and I want to give a shout out to Estefania, who is actually responsible for the reason that I am here. And yeah, but without further ado, I'm just going to get into it because we have a lot to talk about. And in preparation for this talk, I thought, like, what am I even talk about? Or where do I even start? Because it's just so complex. So I thought I just start here. And most of you are very well familiar with stop-motion animation, but just to reiterate, stop-motion animation is the analog, high-tech branch of our industry. So we are doing everything by hand. So every piece we're making is made by hand, and we're using high technology and technology to make these movies. So what are we doing? We're creating worlds, and everything is made from Everything is made from scratch. So it's basically countless pieces of artwork that tell the story. And these movies take a long time. Yeah, so the worlds that we're creating, they are familiar to our world because we're using physical materials to create these worlds. So they are familiar to our world, but the magical thing about it is that there's no limits to imagination, because where can you have, or where's a world where a cricket wears a backpack? So this is certainly why I am in love with animation. Yeah, so I built this talk around what is characteristic about stop-motion animation, and the most characteristic part is that we're dealing with the frozen movement. So what does it mean for us as makers of these movies, and especially for miniature costume fabricators, is that we have to deal with 4 main challenges. And these challenges are gravity, then the movement, proportion, and scale. And I will talk about that. So basically, we're shrinking everything to a manageable size. And this is about a 1/6 of the real life size. And that results in very different laws of physics. For example, if you think of just the weight of the fabric, like if you have a normal dress, like just a dress that hangs down the human body, gravity does the work. Like the gravity defines the creases, gravity helps us with the movement and everything. If we shrink it down, the weight of the garment reduces, so we have to do a lot of effort to create gravity. So we do this deliberately. But first of all, to talk again about the frozen movement, so our puppets are mounted to the set in order to have them stable for the frame to be taken, then to be moved a little bit further. And I mean, you know about this. So what does it mean for the costume? For the costume, it means that we have to get in the costume into the body of the puppet and attach them to the set. So that means that we have to plan the costume accordingly. We have to allow access for these elements to go into the puppet. Then also it means that if you think about a production going up to 2 years, or the filming going up to 2 years, these costumes have to be so they are on the puppet, they are not taken off. So the animator needs to come in from time to time and needs the puppet retentioned. So we have to plan our seams over these areas where the access points are to the puppet. So in order for the animator to tension the costume. Yeah, and then also to go back to gravity. So if you look at the grandfather puppet, so he has these like wide, long, flowing, amazing sleeves. So they look like very heavy, but they were not. So in order to give it the illusion of gravity, we have to apply a lot of supporting and leading elements into the back. So I chose the inside of the Kubo sleeve to kind of illustrate how that looks like. So we have, first of all, a silk lining as a backing. Then we cut out certain areas where we want the fabric to bend. And then we reinforce other areas where we want the fabric to be led and pushed under or over certain areas to create these creases. Because this sleeve, for example, is rock hard. And it has to perform on the stages as something soft flowing. So we have to create, and we use not only the backing, but we also use wires and weights and magnets sometimes to help us pulling the weight of the costume down. Or we use sophisticated armatures. And if you've been to Georgina's talk, she's already talked about this specific armature because we have to allow a costume to not move up and down or left and right. We also have to allow the costume to kind of imitate the natural soft flow of a normal natural garment. So we are basically imitating the real life. And that's why we have to sometimes go to extreme measures to allow that. Yeah, or complex understructures. So here again are the underskirts of the box trolls ball gown scene. Yeah, and you can see it's kind of insane the amount of engineering that goes into these understructures. Yeah, so in short, we apply elements to the back of the costume to make us help them perform as if they were real-life costumes. Yeah, and then also, so we can add elements to the back of the costumes. We can also add elements to the body. So I was talking about proportion, and sometimes the character design asks for a certain way creases crease, or like how a garment kind of like rides up on the hip. And if I would have added these elements to the costume, the whole costume with the added elements would have moved left or right, depending on the movement of the puppet. And I wanted to have a natural look, so I had to build up onto the puppet in order for the costume to move on that body. Yeah, and then here we have the mayor from Pinocchio. And he, for example, he had this really round belly. And in his case, the costume was supposed to be cinched in, or like kind of, it was supposed to look kind of snug around the body, and he was kind of supposed to look as if there was some tension around his belly. So I gave him a full-on bodysuit, a foam padded bodysuit that I was then able to push pins from the front to the back to create that cinched-in look. So I glued the buttons onto the pins, and then I just pushed pins in there. So that was kind of like an easy solution to create that look without having to get a bigger headache. And then also, here you see a good example for the surface design that I'm talking about later. But since I have them up here, so you see the collar and how we imitated the fur. So on the right side, you see that fluffy piece of fur. That is how it originally looked like. So it takes a whole lot of effort to kind of shape the materials with a lot of dye and paint and glue into the materials that we, into the collar that we now see. And then the, and then I have to talk about scale, because to make things believable in our world, we have to make them ourselves. So we can't just go to Joann's or Michael's and just buy a pretty ribbon, even though we do that, but then we do a lot of things to the ribbons and other things to make them or to draw them into our worlds so that they kind of go with the production design. Oh boy. Oh no, it's good. Okay, the surface design. The surface design. So our character lives in the world we're building, and the world reflects on him. So we create the materials according to the production design. So I was talking about this earlier when I talked about the fur collar of the mayor. So I was able to get a hand on this character design again, and that is the character design for the box trolls. And I love to use this because if you look at kind of like the silhouettes of it, you can see like the edges, and that's a very early design. And so these so the form language of the edges, like the frayed out edges and kind of like the style, became the style lines of the production. So this was actually one of the features that we had to build into our work. So it's basically a mutually agreed production design style elements that draw the characters into the world we are creating. So our job here is to bring out these design features and use them in edges, in like how we shape the buttons, and every single detail. And I have some examples for that. So here's Snatcher, and this is like a really good example for what I was saying. So you see the edge of the collar, for example. So that is not that's not arbitrary at all. It's very deliberate. So the edges of the coat and the edges of the fur and everything is kind of related to the initial character design. Also the asymmetry. If you look at the front closure of his vest, like the rugged edge, that is actually an actual style line that we got in the style guide. That's kind of like a guide that everybody uses to create these things. The other thing was the organic appeal to the costumes. So tree bark was one key word. And if you look to the right side, so that is X's sweater. And the whole texture of his sweater was created by us. So in his case, I dyed some butcher's thread and I stitched it. I dyed 2 different color threads, and I stitched it in a certain organic pattern on a power mesh. And then I made the sweater from that textile that I created. And all of this to create the element of surprise, because we didn't want to give him a sweater. We wanted to give him something that looks like a sweater, but then it's not. So we are always looking for the element of surprise, because that makes the magic that we see on screen, because the subconscious notices the unfamiliar, and then and it makes us curious. Like we can't really make out what it is. We just see that it's an amazing piece of art. Yeah. So, and as I said before, we use the style guide to really represent that in every detail, and we really make every detail. So nothing on here is store-bought. So we even made the lace, and even there we have like the slight asymmetry and like the different angles. They were part of the style guide, and yeah. You get the idea. So we put the style codes in the lace that we are creating and into the texture itself. So if you look at the pattern that is in the velvet of the coat, that is actually laser etched into the surface. And then even like these little embroidered lines, that's not arbitrary at all as well. It's very deliberately placed. Yeah, and then I want to talk about the Butcher Sister from Pinocchio. And here, this is actually a really good example for the thought process that goes into creating these garments. So I started out with this plain fabric, and I dyed it in a green. And I painted stripes on it. Again, I was supposed to recreate a Fair Isle knitted sweater. And so I painted stripes on it, and then I ran embroidery machine patterns over it. So it's just like a sewing machine with different embroidery stitches, and I set them on like tiny, like the lowest setting, and then I just ran different stripes over it. And at one point I arrived at the right color combination that appears like a knitted Fair Isle sweater, but it's not, and that makes it interesting. You also see how I used a different kind of patterning. It's like the raglan patterning, and that is because it has 2 reasons. One is because there were joint accesses underneath, and then the second thing is, and that's where we have a lot of freedom, also kind of like design freedom sometimes in the problem-solving process, because it's due to the movement. So if I had a seam there, the material is very thick, it would have looked very awkward. And this way I was able to connect the lines in a way that looked very interesting and more natural. And you see the bacon over there. So this is an actual reference. So we get these references, and then we replicate them. So bring them in our world. So her head tie, for example, is rock hard, and it's a vacuum formed shape that I pulled a cotton over, and here you see the imperfect, perfect lines again. I don't know if some of you might remember, and it's kind of like representing a real life reference in the textile without losing the realistic appeal. This is another example that I pulled, because in stop motion animation we're looking a lot for textures, and textures are very important because just plain fabrics are usually a little bit boring. So we always try to emphasize textures a lot. And then also, so this is a combination because the scale was very very difficult to solve here, because it was like a thicker kind of like cashmere scarf reference. But then we couldn't find the right material because the cashmere scarf material looked really thick, like a thick wool shawl. So what I ended up doing is like I created the pattern digitally, and then I printed it on different silk, thin silk materials with different textures, and they all came out differently. And then with the right backing, we chose the one that looks the closest to a cashmere shawl. And I think that was very successful. And here again, like all the strands, they are all wired because they all have to be controllable for the animator. So all the single strands were movable. Yeah, and then, I mean, we don't have so much time. I could like talk on and on and on and on about this. But I brought a few of the materials. So if you want, I invite you to just have a look at it. So on top, there's actually an actual piece of the Butcher Sister sweater that you can look at. Then also like the silk scarf examples, some of the Mayer samples. I brought some backings. So these are some of the backings we're using. And I mean, it's a photograph, but on the upper right, if you come check them out in person later, you can see for yourself. On the upper right, it's like a foam, and we like to stick everything inside the costume with Pros-Aid. Pros-Aid is a theatrical glue, and it has been really amazing to just stick things onto fabrics because it also has a stabilizing element. Then we use wires, different foams, and all kinds of different fusible interfacings. And on the right side, this is like a personal, or like it's an experiment that I did for my surface design classes, and I used the moth wing, or as an inspiration, and I just tried to see how I could represent that in the material. So from the moth wing, I went to insect eyes, and then also the insect eyes then reminded me to American football. So I kind of landed there, and I brought this because I also wanted to show you how it can be interesting to just play with textures and find real life references and just try to interpret that in the material. And then I want to talk about what makes a good fabricator, because I'm here because I'm teaching these classes, and I know that a lot of you are interested in working in the industry. So what makes a good fabricator? So basically, the engineering mindset. I talk a lot about the engineering mindset. And this is basically the ability to consider the resources according to the needs of the animation process. And further, it means we are problem solvers, innovators, and solution finders. So the engineering mindset is at the base of everything. And how do we get to the engineering mindset? We have to know our craft. We really have to know what we have to do. We have to know our techniques. We have to have an eye for detail and an aesthetic, a feeling for aesthetics. And we also have to know our tools and know our materials. So how do you know all of this if nobody teaches it? So the best thing to learn this is by experience. So you basically want to get your hands into it and try it out for yourself. So sadly, it is that the place where you can get the experience is basically in the workplace, and you don't get into the workplace without experience. So that's kind of the sad thing. So I want to just give you a few ideas of how you can actually do that for yourself. So you basically want to build the foundation. And I mean, I'm teaching the class. This is the puppet that I'm using for the class. But you don't need to take my class to get started. So you just want to start with something simple. Because most of the time, people come to my class and then they ask me, like, how did you do the skirts for the box trolls? Or how did you do these like high arched sleeves? Or how did you do that? And that's all good. I'm like, it's all good things to know. But if you really want to understand it, you want to start with something simple and just understand it and practice it and just go from there. So, and the first thing that I want to emphasize is the patterning or the draping, the way we do it in our industry. And I want to emphasize that because I am talking a lot about the mechanics of garments. And the mechanics of garments are kind of essential to the movement, to the animatability, to everything. So if you understand the balance and the grain line and the gravity, then you're actually like really good setup. So people joke about me sometimes. They say like hashtag respect the grain line, but it's true. It's true. It's important. You're gonna hear me talk a lot about it because it's the foundation. But yeah, so once you have figured out how to get, so what patterning basically is, it's getting from the second dimension into the third dimension. So we wrap a two-dimensional piece of fabric around a three-dimensional shape to encase the body to generate the pattern. And that's the first thing. So we generate the pattern, and then we have to start moving the puppet. So that's when the problems usually start, because that's where we have to know how the whole grid and the balance and the alignment, so basically like the whole grid of like horizontal and vertical and horizontal, how that works so that we can tackle these fitting problems. So fitting is the next step. And there's actually not many things to understand to be really good pattern maker. Yeah, and then of course you want to know how to make the costumes. And there, like you really want to start with the stitching. So the stitching is one thing. In stop motion animation, we use different types of stitching because we don't use sewing machines. Just trying to fit a tiny miniature costume under a sewing machine, just the thought is kind of funny. So we basically do everything by hand. And there's, so we use the same stitches, but we use them in different ways. So you want to familiarize yourself with that. So the sewing techniques are important. Then another challenge, what's really important and what will make your life so much easier, is to understand how to avoid material buildup, because the materials are thicker, and the transitions of the seams are always a challenge. So there are actually techniques that you can apply to help you with that. And I am teaching my way, so which is not the way. Like every fabricator has their own way of doing things. So whatever you figure out will probably be good, like as long as it works. So do what works for you, but then you know the best what works for you when you understand the foundation. So this is basically how it works. Then also, like the adding of details. So how can we create crisp edges? Like how can we have these details like look like it's part of a pair of jeans and not just like two pockets kind of glued on there, or a neckband that looks like it's actually part of the costume and not like a piece of clay wrapped around. So there's techniques and kind of tips and tricks, I call them tips and tricks, that you can actually use in all these situations to help you. So these are good things to know. And you can take this then to make other things. So this is basically like the basic foundation that I'm teaching in my classes and that people then take to make their own things. So of course there's a second level to that. Like of course you can go deeper into pattern making, and some of you might know about pattern making, so that's the moment where you can actually like try to translate into the small scale. So these are examples from students from my second class. So in the second class, or like when you understand the foundation of pattern making, that's when you can start planning separating seams or moving seams or implementing darts or planning creases. But I recommend to do that when you have understood patterning in general. Yeah, so these are just some examples of my students. And I am teaching a second deep dive in like an advanced pattern making system where I translated life-size patterning into the small scale and make it available for animation needs. Yeah, and then like you want to build a portfolio. So I like to invite, or I invited Angela from HR from Leica to our classes to talk to my students. Because students want to know, like, how do they get in the industry? Like, how do the portfolios need to look like? What do companies, what do they want to see? And so you want to build a portfolio, but then you might not know what you put in there. And my recommendation is you want to experiment a lot, and just like document your process, like document all the thought process. I was talking to somebody earlier, and sometimes people only show the really clean photographs of finished pieces, and they look amazing. But if somebody that wants to hire you looks at it, then they are like, well, yeah, but we don't know how she got there. Like, we want to know how she thinks, like what's her process. So she encouraged everybody to really document the process and really also show like beginning stages and the finished one, because then they can see the progress and the advancement and how people are able to progress. So to me, that sounds amazing, because it's so much fun to build a portfolio. And yeah, so the other recommendation that I have for young people wanting to enter the industry is like study what interests you, like really what you want to learn. I mean, like, do the foundation first. Yeah, and then document your progress. And I pulled, again, like 2 references of one of my students, because she wanted to give her character. It's from the second class. We build own designs in there. So she wanted to give her character like some planned creases, kind of like a loose flowing, like creased necktie, front, shirt, insert. And she was struggling with the creases, and we were talking about it. And that's just how you start. So you start and you just hit a wall, because most of the times when you have an idea and you try it out, it does not work. That's why we're problem solvers and solution finders. So we hit a problem, and then we figure it out. So she was like, oh, okay, I get it. The fabric just doesn't do what I want. So I really need to study the fabric. So what she does, and what I thought was amazing, she took a piece of paper and really tried to make that stiff piece of paper move as if it was fluid and a piece of fabric. So she folded it like her creases, and then she noticed, like, okay, it's not bending yet, it's not flowing yet. What do I have to do to it to make it do what I want? So she ended up making this origami fold of her front piece, and I thought that was amazing. I just loved it. So yeah, so find something that you want to study and document it and just learn from it. And this is really what gets your attention. Interest gets your attention. Yeah, this is another piece a student of mine did. And I was so blown away by it because it's so beautiful. And I pulled it for 2 reasons. Like, one of it is like she really wanted to study the skirt. So skirts are very difficult to make. And 3 students tried to make a skirt, and they all ran into the same thing, because skirts have to move like in this way and in that way, and they have to move upwards. And it's like, I mean, there's a reason to it why everything takes so long. Like, these skirt under constructions take months to figure out, and not only one person, but sometimes several persons. But she wanted to study it, and she really arrived at a point that is just mind-blowing. So just the draping of the fabric. So she was able to study the grain line and how it behaves, how her skirt was able to move. And the other thing that I want to point out here is the proportion, because she really nailed the proportion. Like, if you look at the reference, she made her puppet, and her puppet is a little bit bigger. It doesn't have that narrow waist, but she was able to really give the impression of that reference and make it into that costume. So I was so happy when I saw that. And yeah, and there's even more to talk about. She made the fabric for the skirt. She printed it, and she just tried out different textures. She printed the stripes. Then she tried to have them all single elements until she noticed that she doesn't need to do all the extra work. And then she simplified it. So just the whole process was just really interesting to follow. And then another thing is also cool, like the edges, like how she solved the edging. So it really looks to scale. So the way she folded the edges, and it's all crisp. So it looks believable. So we always try to make our work believable, as if it would be the real thing. Yeah, and so thank you. I hope there's some room for some questions, and I hope I can answer them. Also, I want to say the QR code is, so this is, if you missed the workshop, you can find the video here. So you will need a pattern to make the t-shirt, and I want to add the PDF for the pattern onto the website. If it isn't there yet, just try again. But the video on how to make this t-shirt, this is what we did in the pattern for this t-shirt in the mini workshop. So the video to that is on my website, and I hope this works. If it doesn't work, let me know. But anyway, okay, awesome. Yeah, cool. Yeah, so if you have any questions, okay. Do we have? I mean, maybe I can just.
Hi. Oh. Hi. Hi.
Uh-huh.
1. Okay. Hi. Well, my question is, well, most of the characters have like clothes, and like in the lore, all the clothes aren't like new. So how do you make the clothes look like they are already being used, or are old, or something? Like, do you do something special, or?
Yeah, so so sometimes, so it's basically what paint does after we finish the costume. So we finish the costume, and then it's usually done on our end, and then paint comes in and does the aging process. So that involves usually a lot of paint. But sometimes we already create the costume in a way that it looks kind of like, yeah, like scruffed out edges, or like sometimes we sand parts of the material away, and yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, more questions. I'm just going to try. If you speak.
Okay. Here.
Uh, what has been the most challenging costume you have made?
Oh, the most challenging costume. So they are all challenging in their own ways, but I would say the grandfather's sleeve. Yeah, because it's like, it's the biggest, longest open costume part that had to be manageable, like all the way to the ground. And that took a long time. It took probably 3 months to do, to just figure out the movement of the sleeve, because everything had to be predetermined, like, yeah. And then there's lots of challenges where sometimes you have no idea where to even start, like X's chainmail, for example. It's like a chainmail is a very loose piece of fabric, and it had to be first of all yeah, not see-through, and then we had to hide wires in there. So I ended up crocheting it with sewing thread, and that worked. But most of these things in the beginning, it's always like, how do we even do that? Like, yeah. So they are all challenging. They are all challenging. Yeah. Okay. More question.
Okay. Hello.
Hi.
I've seen that in some movies there are these kind of clothes that have, I don't know, these fantasy patterns or I don't know, like her clothes that have this image printed on the clothes. So my question is, which kind of techniques did you use to make the clothes have these print lines of something like that?
Oh, you mean like an applique on there, or kind of like a...
Just like where they have image in the clothes. I don't know where you have this kind of
okay.
things in clothes.
Oh, it's, I mean, the easiest, you can use all kinds of things. Like we use transfer print for something like that, or just screen print, or you can applique, or you can paint. So I mean, the thing to understand is, like, you can use anything you want. You can really use anything you want if you can create what you want to create. And have it look believable without compromising the movement. So that's the golden rule. But yeah, I would use screen print myself, or just paint. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hi. So you were talking about how the mayor from Pinocchio had his belly had to be made from. Well, you had to make the belly on him. I was wondering, when did you guys decide that it had actually had to be made out of cloth instead of sculpted? Because you were saying that you had to pin the buttons on him, but I assume that it's mostly sculpted, or did you have to remove that part of the sculpture to make the belly?
Oh yeah. Okay, so this is it was actually a chain of events that eventually let me be able to make that coat, because the body itself was a little smaller until it got bigger. And then that was to my advantage, because then I could use the foam to create that look without more difficulty. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Hello?
Hi.
We were wondering, do you make different costumes depending on which side the rig of the character is gonna come out?
Yeah, I plan the seams over the lines where the rig axes and the joint axes are. So for example, the side seam is always a really good way to just have yeah, to lead the side seam over the rig. Then, I mean, puppets are different. Like puppets have all kinds of different locations for these things. So sometimes they have like upper body rigs, and I was talking about this in the other class, because sometimes they have to be accessed from the back. So I have to put in a back seam, which is not naturally common for like shirts or t-shirts or something, but sometimes it has to be done. Or sometimes in this case, we just hide them under something. So the print that he mentioned would be a good opportunity. So if I want to hide something, then I just put a patch on something that I could release easily in order to have access to it. But like the side seam, the underarm seam, so usually the elbows and the knees, they are like the most common places, and the hip and the shoulder that have to be open and closed. And there's seams already, so yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then there's a, oh, okay.
Hello. What's the process behind when clothes have to break, like in Missing Link, in the part where the suit breaks? How do you do it? Is it the different shoes? Do you pre-bake it, or how is it done?
So usually we try to make these costumes so that they don't break in the first place. That's why we put all that lining in the back of the fabric. Or we reinforce the seam allowance with the glue so that the seam allowance doesn't fray out when we place stitches and we really apply some force. That's the first goal, to really look at the whole scope of the production and really make sure that we plan the costume like accordingly so that it doesn't break in the first place. But if it breaks, we try to repair them to the best we can, and sometimes we reinforce them, we reweave the texture with the same threads. So you just come up with something that you can do, because all costumes are different. But basically, to answer your question, we have to bring them back to the way they looked, because they always have to look identical.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. So I have 2 questions. The first one is, you mentioned that the clothes are glued to the character, to the puppet. So
sometimes.
Okay. So for example, when you have a character that has multiple like clothes changes, like different outfits, do you have to create do you have to glue that into different like structures of the character?
That's an excellent question, actually, because we have, so usually we have one puppet per outfit. So we don't take the costumes off or on. Or in the class on Tuesday, a similar question came up. And also the question of layering. So what if in one scene the costume or the character takes off their jacket? It would be a different puppet, because if you imagine like having layers of costume on a puppet, like it would restrict the movement, it would add volume, and it would just be complicated, because the costumes kind of like, they interfere, and everything we don't need, we don't use. So for example, we have fake collars that we just stitch under necklines. We have fake cuffs. So basically, everything we don't need, we don't make, and we fake it basically. The other reason is if you think, I mean, it can also be like a cost consideration, right? Like to reuse a character, but like dressing and undressing takes a lot of time. So sometimes like in the shooting process, we have to be really fast, and sometimes like really, really fast, so there's just no time to do it. And then also if you imagine like a character wears a suit and a suit and a shirt underneath, and the animator just like moves it for, I don't know, a week or a few months, like the shirt underneath will probably be dust. Or yeah, you couldn't just take it off. So there's a lot of reason why we consider making different puppets. Yeah.
Yeah. And my other question was, like, how long does it take to make a full outfit for a character?
How long does it take?
Yeah.
Oh, that is so, that totally depends. It totally depends on the complexity. It depends on the look. So what I like to say often is like the reason why everything's skin tight is because then it's easy to animate. And that just saves a lot of problem solving and kind of like making things work. So a sleeve that is cut like right to her shoulder is like that allows the most range of movement. So that's why I was talking about the grandfather sleeve. Like as soon as we have some air in the costume, that is a problem because it can cause flickering, right? It's not controllable. So in order to control it, we have to do all these things. And then when we do these things, we also need to make sure that these things that we do actually work and help the movement. So it just opens a can of worms. So sometimes that's why the grandfather sleeve took so long. And some costumes even take like a year to develop, or like characters are literally developed over a year or even more, depending on the complexity and their performance in the movie. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to answer your question.
Hi, so my question is, do you have a material that is your, do you have a material that is your go-to material or something that you most likely will choose to work with? And if that doesn't work, then you explore other options. But do you have a go-to material? Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and this is actually part of the experience that I was talking about earlier. So what we do as fabricators, we are like constantly at the lookout for materials that work for us. And if we find good references and good suppliers of these materials, then we just stock up. So we already know that certain fabrics work really well for certain things, so we always have a bunch of that. And then we dye it, and we just go from there. So it's the so you want to build kind of like a kind of like an archive or something, or just like, basically know your material and collect things that work, because that makes you faster in solution finding when you run into trouble. Yeah. Huh? There was one question. Oh, I mean, there's so many questions, sorry.
For one more.
Okay, one more question.
Yeah.
I know.
¿Sí o no?
Sí. Hi.
Hi.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Guadalajara.
Thank you.
So the question is more personal. What movies inspire you to work specifically on the making of clothing in stop-motion movies?
Oh. Okay, this is actually really funny, because before working on my first stop-motion movie, I was working in theater and live action. So I'm not coming through the stop-motion education system. So I literally, when somebody approached me if I would like to work on a stop motion animated movie, I remember having that thought of like, oh yeah, I guess they wear clothes. So, and so that's kind of like, but then I started on that movie, and I was just like, I never left because it's so exciting. So, I mean, all of the movies I find really inspiring, but I get inspired by crafts. So I love crafts. I love breaking the rules. So I love just doing things differently to create new things. So that is why I do miniature costumes, because that is really where I can apply all of that. But I mean, all of the movies are inspiring in some way. So yeah. Yeah.
Annika.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Muchas gracias por venir. Vamos a seguir con nuestra última presentación. Si quieren formarse de ese lado, las salidas por ahí.